Before we begin this video, there's just two things I'd like to say. Firstly, Canada is the best country on earth. It's the most tolerant, the least racist, the most accepting. It's a lot better than America. It's the most pro-rights for LGBTQ. It invented peacekeeping. It invented nonviolent international diplomacy. Canada is the world leader in diversity, social liberalism, and it's awesome. And the people to the southern border of us are subhuman scum, particularly those from the south, and they don't even really deserve to be referenced. So I just like to make that statement. The second statement is I just like to acknowledge that we're all sitting on land that was stolen from First Nations people. Canada is an evil country that was built upon stealing land from the indigenous inhabitants through cultural genocide. And the Canadian state is at its core an extremely evil institution that needs to be destroyed and rebuilt from the ground up. And every aspect of Canadian society is disgusting and racist. And that's pretty much what you'll hear every Canada Day. Or I suppose it kind of alternates between the two. I remember, I guess it was 4 years ago now, when we had Canada 150, and they had like the rainbow Canadian flag and all that stuff, and all these celebrations. It was like the most jingoistic, triumphalist, ultranationalist thing I'd ever seen. It was all about how Canada was awesome. We've even begun to see people in Canada attack non-white countries for having conservative values. So, like, I've started to see them attack Saudi Arabia or Uganda or Jamaica or just some of these other countries because no one in Canada has higher social status than the LGBTQ or whatever it's called this week. But you just have the most disgustingly smug, satisfied, Canada invented everything type of attitude on most Canada days. And you get that kind of periodically throughout the year. It's this result of like this inferiority complex because we have America to the south, which has far more accomplishments. So if they have like, oh, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, they just have to take these examples they can find and just aggressively push them as a way to try to deal with their inferiority complex. And any time like Canada sends like 100 soldiers to some war that America sends like 100,000 to, it has to be like the narrative is we won the war single-handedly. Like I know when I was in high school, we weren't taught about the Eastern Front. I didn't even really, if I didn't know about World War II, I wouldn't even know the Soviet Union was involved. Basically, the history book said that Canada single-handedly won World War I and World War II. And once again, even back then, you get this weird bipolar attitude where Canada was awesome, they beat Germany by themselves, but also Canada is the most evil country on earth because the internment of Japanese Canadians. And this year, it seems like we're swung back in the other direction. So like I said, 3 years ago, or I guess 4 years ago, and for the last couple of years, it's been super triumphalist. Canada's the best country in the world. Everywhere else sucks. And now it's Canada's the worst country in the world. Canada's the only country in the world that's ever engaged in cultural genocide, if you can call it that. Canada's the only country in the world that's ever committed crimes against a subsection of its population. But I suppose then again that also is kind of a form of narcissism. Because it's saying we have to be the best, even if we're the best at being the worst. So even though you could argue that the Americans were a lot more brutal when they were dealing with their indigenous population, and you could even make the case the Spanish were, the Canadian narcissism and inferiority complex means if we're going to be the ones who did something to them, it's got to be the worst. It's like, it's worse than the Holocaust, it's worse than the Armenian genocide, it's the worst thing of all time. And I think that's a good way to describe kind of the Canadian worldview, is it is extremely narcissistic. Now, you could argue all forms of nationalism have some sort of narcissism within them, and kind of an uncritical belief that your country's better than every other country on earth, and a tendency to exaggerate your accomplishments. But I feel like most countries that have that aren't nearly as bipolar about it. Russia doesn't look at themselves that way. I don't really think France does either. The left and right in France, I think both tend to be fairly nationalistic. I don't think Italians look at themselves that way. The Chinese certainly don't look at themselves that way. The only real comparisons is maybe Japan. I'm not really sure how bad war guilt there actually is. And I guess you could also say maybe Britain, which is another Anglo country, in which there is this weird bipolar attitude where they hate themselves but also think they're the greatest country on earth. And this kind of gets into my attitudes towards Canada because I have very, very mixed attitudes myself. And they're kind of the opposite of it because my father's side, which is I tend to identify with, comes from England. And I tend to be very proud of Canada's European and Christian heritage. I'm proud that the country is, generally speaking, very prosperous. It has a relatively low crime rate. There is a certain degree of collectivism you have here that you don't have in the US, and I think a certain degree of national, with the exception of Quebec, cohesion that you don't have in the US to nearly the same extent. And I like those things about Canada. It's a very beautiful country. It's a very resource-rich country. And at the end of the day, it's home. Like, you can hate it or love it, and I hate a lot of things about it, but it is my home. I was born in southern Ontario. I've lived here 30 years. If there's like a state that's more conservative, where the population's more Christian and right-winged in the South, it's okay. I might agree with them on social issues, and I guess kind of my worldview to a certain extent, but it's a different culture than mine. It's a different way of life. It's something I'm not really familiar with, and that I would kind of find difficult to adjust to, if only because of the climate. And this is kind of related to another thing I find is a lot of people in these circles tend to really idealize ruralism, living in small towns or living in rural communities. And as some other friends I've talked to have said, who are people with kind of a similar political perspective to me, while in a lot of cases people in rural areas tend to be more conservative, more religious, more right wing, I don't necessarily have that much culturally or in terms of my lifestyle in common with them. I probably have more culturally in common with the the people I disagree with and who are my mortal enemies politically. And I've grown up in an urban environment, and it's what I'm used to. And I don't really have a desire to do this return to nature thing, to go to some small town in the middle of nowhere and farm a homestead or start becoming like a professional hunter or something. And that's kind of the way I feel about people who say, we'll just move to a red state. Who knows, I might at some point, but just move to a red state, or there's the people who move to Eastern Europe, or the people who move to Asia or something like that. And I do sympathize with it, and I do get where they're coming from. But at the same time, I think you have to have a lot of compassion and understanding for people who don't really want to do that. Like, you might even have someone who's from California or some blue state or Vermont, and they grew up there, and that's what they're used to, and that's their home. And leaving that behind to go live in a state with a completely different climate, with a different culture, just because they happen to agree with you more in terms of your ideology and worldview, is very difficult. I'm not saying that that's a bad idea or anything. I'm just saying you have to be conscious of that. And that's kind of how I feel towards Canada. I mean, it is my home. To a certain extent, I do love my country. I think you can't grow up in something without at least having some strong feelings for it. But on the other hand, I think it's a very evil country, and I think it does an immense amount of evil throughout the world. I would say honestly that Canada might be the most socially liberal country on earth. I don't think it's necessarily as feminist as Sweden. I think it's more pro gender diversity, or what you want to call it, than any other place on earth. I think Toronto in particular is Sodom and Gomorrah for any number of different reasons, and is a disgusting cesspool. We have one of the worst political classes on earth. I can never find the quote, but I forget if it was a prime minister or just some major politician referred to Canada as a hotel of nations where just random people come here to make money and then leave. And that's the attitude I find a lot of immigrants have, is they're just kind of here to make a quick buck. It's just kind of like you move out to, I don't know, a mine in the prairies or to Alaska to the oil fields or something. You make a bunch of money, you don't really intend to stay there long term, and then you leave. And I kind of feel to a large extent that's what this country's like. And once again, it's schizophrenic. It's like, okay, so the entire country is built on stolen native land. Okay, I got it. So how we're going to deal with that is we're going to bring in a ton of people to live on that land who have no historical connection to those people and don't give a shit about them. And that's how we're going to fix the situation. But I've seen all kinds of indigenous peoples being like, yeah, we want more immigration from the Middle East because Islam is a part of our history in a way Christianity wasn't. It's not like Christianity hasn't been here for like 500 years or however long. So they're like, no, we don't want that, but like Pakistanis and people from Africa and stuff, that is something that's more compatible and is more familiar to us. And the more people we bring in to occupy the land that we claim was stolen from us, somehow that's going to make it more likely that we're going to get it back. And I mean, this is kind of a thing, because I know in New Zealand, the Maori, from my understanding, are very much against Chinese immigration because they don't want to become a large, like more of a minority within their own country. New Zealand, even if they don't like the fact that it's English, is still their home, and they're still an important part of that society. And they don't want that to be diluted by the Chinese coming in and imposing their culture and getting rid of theirs, or just making it part of the blender. And so we come to Canada Day, and I don't know how to feel about it. Because generally speaking, I don't like celebrating it because I don't like what this country represents. But this year, all the people I hate are saying, don't celebrate Canada Day. This country's evil. My sister lectured me about how I shouldn't be celebrating Canada Day. And just because the people who say and do that are such F-slurs about it, it's kind of like with the Iraq War or some other things. It makes me just want to support it because I don't want to be on the same side as those people. And they like ruin it because their reasons are so bad. So I guess ironically, ultimately, I have the same position as they do, although a reverse of their values. I dislike this country because of its liberalism, because of the bad it does to this world. And I like its colonial heritage, its English background, the biculturalism of French and English Canada, and kind of all the things that they hate. So, once again, heading into Canada Day, I don't know how to feel about it. Those are just my thoughts on the matter. God bless, and talk to you guys later.